watch, so I'm just checking on the time. Okay. Every once in a while, I'll just... Thank you.
Oh, to give me mine too.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're going to be discussing with one another what I think to be a foundational important question for us living here in America as committed Jews and as dedicated citizens of the United States. I'm going to assume for the purposes of this conversation that we all are citizens of the United States. But the truth of the matter is that that question is only an academic one. Right striking to the core of what it means to be a modern Orthodox Jew, to be a committed Jew, but a committed Jew that lives in the world, that engages the world, that learns from the world and teaches the world, is the question of what responsibility, what obligation we have towards the polity, towards the society around us in terms of making it a more perfect society. It goes without saying that there are things that we have to do as Jews to help our fellow human being. If a person is in need, if they're poor, there's a mitzvah of tzedakah, right? If a person is at the side of the road and their load has fallen off their wagon, the Torah says I have a responsibility to hakem tzakimimo, to stop and to help them reload. Right? There are things that I have to do. I have to love my friend like I love myself. All of those mitzvot that we normally call mitzvot bein adam lechavero are mitzvot which require me to engage with another person. But responsibility that I have to not engage necessarily just with other people, but to engage with society as a whole, to perfect, to better, to improve society as a whole. And that's part of what I want to talk about over the course of these next couple of weeks. Of conversations that have taken place as a part of Machon Siach here at SIR, which is the research arm of SIR High School. There's been a cohort of faculty members together with some lay people that over the course of the last year plus have these sorts of questions. We've read texts together, we've spoken together about these issues, and there'll be printed material coming out from that cohort in the months to come. But as an extension of that is going to be some of the conversations and sources and texts and issues that we discuss here together over the course of the next couple of weeks. And so I want to begin by months. It's a question which I don't have an answer to, and I'm hoping that all of you can help me find an answer to this question. Working with the assumption that all of us are citizens of the United States, but the truth of the matter is if you are a citizen of another country, pretend as if I'm asking this question of you and your country and your citizenship. What obligations, what duties, what responsibilities do I have as a citizen of the United States? What must I do?
Vote.
Vote? Okay.
Vote. Uphold the laws.
Okay. So we've heard. I heard lots of suggestions thrown out. Let's take them one by one. Okay. The first thing that I heard yelled out by, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Sheila got her up.
But Sheila says, I think I heard it from someone in the back too,
Yeah.
is that I have a responsibility to vote. Right. Okay.
Yes.
I have a duty to vote, an obligation, right, to vote. Yeah. Is that really true? If I don't vote, what happens to me? Nothing, right? Voting, not...
Sorry.
That's okay. Take your time. Here are some sources. Voting, actually, as it plays out in society, and as it actually has been formulated by law, voting is not a responsibility as much as it is a
privilege,
or what we would call a privilege. What do we call in political parlance? What do we call something that another R word?
Right.
A right. Voting is a right. Okay. Yes, we speak about voting as if it's our civic duty, but let's call a spade a spade. We have no duty to vote. It is your right to not vote just as much it is your right to vote. You are no less, legally I mean, you are no less a citizen of this country if you don't vote as you are if you do. Are we in agreement about that? Okay? So Sheila, I had that same instinct, right? That we have a responsibility to vote. It's actually not a responsibility in a legal sense, all right?
It should be.
Okay, all right. So the possibility of voting, which I think is something that we would all instinctively maybe intuit, is actually not an obligation that I have as a citizen. What else did we say? Taxes, okay? Taxes. Is there a tax that I must pay merely by virtue of the fact that I am a citizen of this country?
No.
Right? If I am not a citizen, I am a legal resident, or for that matter, if I'm an illegal resident of this country, and I earn income, am I obligated to pay taxes?
Yes.
Just as much as the citizen?
Yes.
Right? Is there any tax that I must pay because I'm a citizen of this country? Is there any fee that I must pay because I'm a citizen of this country, right, that I didn't have to pay before? I would say no.
No.
Okay?
Well, now that they got rid of poll taxes, yeah.
Well,
Well,
right,
poll
but
tax is gone.
that's a tax on voting. That's not a tax on citizenship, right?
It's gone.
So true, but it's also gone. So okay, so it's not really voting. It's not really taxes. Anything else?
Uphold the law.
Do I have more of a responsibility to uphold the law because I am a citizen than I am if I am a legal resident of this country?
No.
I don't know. So in my months of thinking about this, okay, I actually thought of one thing which is the best example, which actually also doesn't exist anymore, which is what? The draft. Okay? The draft. The draft was an obligation that I had, okay, was actually upheld by the Supreme Court exactly 100 years ago in 1918, in the heat of World War I, in the Supreme Court case Arder v. U.S. So the notion of conscription was challenged under the First Amendment as being unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court sided with the government. The government has a right to enlist forcefully, coercively, the citizens of the United States to serve in the armed forces in order to protect and defend the country. Okay? And that was so popular, right? The idea that I had a responsibility, an obligation towards the nation of which I'm a citizen, that the government did away with it after the Vietnam War. Okay? And now it doesn't exist anymore. There's you register for the draft in case they ever wanted to reinstitute it, but for all intents and purposes, the beginning of the Carter administration, they did away with it. It doesn't exist anymore. Okay?
But you just said that registration was a requirement still.
So yes. So technically what I must do is fill out a form and send it in, right? In theory, it could exist. In practice, it does not. I would actually, we don't want to get political here, but the idea that our armed forces are a professional force rather than a voluntary one, rather than something that is based on conscription, might actually have what to do with us being in wars that go on for a really, really long time. If my children and your grandchildren had to go to war, we'd probably be less inclined to support wars that continue to go on and on and on, right? And that's the extent to which we'll address that, okay? But the simple fact of the matter is, in the United States of America, it's very hard to put your finger on something that you must do because you are a citizen, a responsibility that you have because you are a citizen. I've spent the last few months, as we've been studying citizenship here at SAR, Googling in different ways and in different formulations, duties, citizenship, responsibilities. I'm just trying to find some study, something, yeah.
Isn't there something that's sort of American Torah about that? If you go to George Washington's letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, in which he describes how we, that citizens generally should comport themselves. I would call that Shabbat.
Okay, so I would actually agree with you that there may be a sort of unwritten, what we could call a Torah Sheba'al Peh, we can call it like an unwritten code of what it means to be a citizen, to comport yourself in a certain way, to be a responsible person. All these things are very nice and incredibly hard to pin down. What my definition of a good citizen, a good Samaritan may not be yours, which may be different from his, which may be different from hers. And it's so Torah Sheba'al Peh that it's actually completely in the abstract. But yes, I think most of us would intuit that something like that does exist. We should just note that our founding documents, okay, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on this and most of our time discussing the Torah side of it, but our founding documents speak very little, if at all, right, about things that citizens must do, right? The Declaration of Independence, the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, as you see from source number 1, is formulated in the context not of responsibilities, but in the context of rights. Okay? Now those rights are God-given, right? Which kind of makes it very difficult. When you speak about rights being God-given, it's very hard to distinguish between citizens and non-citizens. Why should we distinguish at all if we really believe that to be the case? But, be that as it may, we speak about the citizenship or governments in the context of securing rights, God-given rights, right? That's what the preamble of the Declaration of Independence speaks about. In contrast, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there are 30 articles in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, Universal Human Rights, and in the second to last of them, Article 29, the article begins, everyone has duties to the community, right? Such a formulation, I would venture to guess, doesn't and couldn't exist in any of our founding documents. Our founding documents are almost all rights-based, not responsibilities-based. And so, that at the same time, I found this formulation to be remarkable. In source number 3, the Department of Justice, when at a swearing-in ceremony throughout the 80s, I'm not sure if this text has changed. But in one of the readings that I saw this particular formulation. They would give out this pamphlet to all the newly minted citizens of the United States called A Welcome to USA Citizenship. And in that document it says, this citizenship which has been solemnly conferred upon you is a thing of the spirit, not of the flesh. Right? It's like in your neshama to be a citizen. Okay? When you took the oath of allegiance to the Constitution of the United States, you claimed for yourself the God-given, unalienable rights which that document sets forth as the natural right of all men. Okay? And women, of course. But, right, these rights are God-given. They're natural, right? And I spoke a moment ago about the tension or conflict between if they're God-given and natural rights of all men, why should a citizen have more rights than a non-citizen? Okay? Which sort of begs the question, which is, we speak about rights, what about obligations? The Bill of Rights, in fact, all of the amendments to the Constitution, virtually all of them, with the exception of one, speaks about things that I, as a citizen, have a right to do, okay? Or a right to have, right? A right to be free from, right? The entirety of the Constitution are things the government is not allowed to do. Never does the Constitution speak about things that I am not allowed to do except for one thing, which was what?
Guns. Gun control.
Gun control is something that the Constitution says I may do. I may own a gun.
Yes.
Prohibition.
Right? There was one amendment that said citizens are not allowed to do this. And it was so popular,
We got rid of it.
we got rid of it. Okay? So what I'm trying to establish with this introduction, what? No. What I'm trying to establish with this introduction is, from the perspective of an American, right? It's very hard to come up with something that I could draw a circle around, that I can point to and say, this is my responsibility to society. Legally, right? even ethically, right? What can I say I must do? We could speak in the abstract. I have to be a good person. I have to uphold the law, right? But those sorts of things, A, are in the abstract. B, if I'm a legal resident and not a citizen, all right, what is it, to the extent we can even legally distinguish between those two things, what does citizenship actually mean for me in terms of my duties to the society? So when we speak about protection, we speak about the government's responsibility toward me, not my responsibility towards it, right? From a Jewish perspective, is there a responsibility? So we've already established that from our founding documents and from the society in which we live, it's very hard. And I should mention, by the way, because I forgot, it didn't come up. And there's another thing that I thought of that often comes up in conversations like this about things I must do as a citizen, and that's what? We hate it. We hate it when we get it in the mail. Jury duty, okay? Well, I don't hate it either. I was just testing you and see if you guys did. So the truth of the matter is that it's not something we hate. It's at worst an inconvenience. But either way, most juries that I sit on aren't federal juries. They're not a function of my being a citizen of the United States. They're state and local juries. A small, tiny fraction of people who get called up for jury duty actually serve, and an even smaller fraction of people actually serve on federal juries. So it's hard to say that's a responsibility or an obligation of being a citizen. Anyway, what about from a Jewish perspective? From a Jewish perspective, are there things I must do? Do I have a responsibility as a Jew to contribute to the society in which I live? All right? That can be spoken about and can be discussed and analyzed both from the perspective of a Jew living in a government run by Jews, like in the most pristine form of Jewish self-rule that the Torah speaks about, that the Gemara speaks about, that we hope, God willing, may one day, right? That we hope, God willing, will come soon. B'mehera b'yameinu, okay? But it can also be spoken about and more relevant to us in the context of living in a society that is run and that is governed by foreigners, by Gentiles, or at least by a government which is secular. What are my responsibilities towards that government? And even if you say that I do have responsibilities toward that government from a Jewish perspective, what is the scope of that responsibility? Do I have a responsibility to promote the welfare of that government insofar as the welfare of that government means the welfare of me and my people? Or do I have a responsibility to promote more than that? Not just my own welfare by extension of the welfare of the government, but actually the welfare of society at large. Questions, comments, anything we've said so far?
Dina de Malchuta Dina.
Dina de Malchusa Dina. Very good. So what does that mean? Dina.
The law of the land is the law.
The law of the so the Talmud presents a principle, Dina de Malchuta Dina, which we're going to have to discuss maybe in future weeks, that the law of the land is the de facto law, even from a Jewish perspective. What does that say about the relationship between Jews and the government in which they live? What do we do in situations where our law and their law are in conflict? Who do we follow? What is our obligation in that scenario? So,
Are there examples that you can give? Like, what's one scenario in which that would be the case?
just as an example, and we'll discuss it more at length when we move further. But let's talk about the following scenario: copyright law. Okay, intellectual property. Right? If you read the halachic sources, there is very little in halacha that we would deem as theft, right? From an intellectual property perspective. Okay, the idea that I couldn't take a sefer written by a scholar and reprint it, or borrow whole passages from his work without attribution or permission, it's hard to justify from a merely strictly halachic perspective that such a thing would be prohibited. In fact, in medieval times, that was the height of compliment. The idea that I would use your material, okay? What that says about you is like, right? Incredible. Modern
You
secular.
would give credit to the source.
Sometimes not. Sometimes I would just say, there are those who say, right?
In the Talmud, they always quote the
Correct. In medieval sources, lots of times you'll have citations or even full borrowed paragraphs and formulations which are not attributed. Okay? Now, I'm speaking in generalizations, and there's obviously more to it. But secular law, already from centuries ago, had stricter guidelines and standards about those sorts of things than halacha does. So what do I do? So must I abide by the secular authorities or not? And even if you say that I do, must I because secular law says so, or must I because halacha says that I have to listen to secular law? That's the question about dina de malchus dina. We're again speaking about lots of things that we're going to have to delve into as we move forward. But what I want to do for the remaining, that's kind of part one of our conversation, just the notion, the idea, the general suggestion that speaking about responsibilities as a citizen from the perspective of an American is very hard to do. Yes?
So your last comment begs the question, is there a responsibility as a citizen of the United States to adhere to the United States law codes?
So,
And as Kate did outside, might that be counted as one of these, hard to pin down responsibilities as a United States citizen?
right, so what the suggestion before was that maybe a responsibility and obligation that I have is to abide by the law, right? And that is most certainly true.
What you're saying is that there's no distinction between citizens.
Exactly. Is there? I don't know. It doesn't seem like to me that there would be. Citizenship is spoken about only in the context of privilege, of rights. I don't know of something that because I have been conferred and granted this God-given, what the United States Department of Justice calls a matter of the spirit, right? The idea, the notion that a matter of the spirit wouldn't enjoin me and require me to do something it's remarkable, right? It's a matter of the spirit, not of the flesh. And yet it doesn't bind me, nowadays, at least in the year 2018, to anything. The question is, what about from the perspective of a Jew? Does Judaism, Jewish tradition, Jewish texts, halacha, go beyond that and say we have a responsibility, maybe even an obligation, to contribute to the society in which we live, to make it better? And so, the answer to that question, at the very least, let's put it out there. In source number 4, Michael Walzer recently published a book called In God's Shadow, Politics in the Hebrew Bible. It's very dense, not an easy read, but a good one nonetheless. And in that, at the very beginning of that book, he speaks about the biblical covenant, and he says, to what does the covenant oblige its subject? After the people say, we will do, which was of course what happened at Har Sinai, right? Na'aseh v'nishma. After the people say, we will do, what is to be done? Each individual who joins himself or herself in that quote-unquote we is bound to obey God's law. But all they have promised is their own obedience and faithfulness. Nothing in the biblical text seems to reach beyond that. There is no demand on individuals that they act politically to ensure general obedience and faithfulness, or to help create a holy or a just community. The question doesn't arise. The political activity of ordinary people is not a biblical subject, nor is there any explicit recognition of political space, an agora or forum, where people congregate to argue about and decide on the policies of the community. Michael Walzer suggests that from a biblical perspective, there is no obligation, right? That at least I'm going to give him more credit, at least from a covenantal perspective, from the perspective of what I am responsible to do towards God because we stood at Sinai and accepted the Torah, that doesn't require me to do much more than follow the law and follow the Torah as it was given to us at Har Sinai. The idea that we would have a responsibility to promote something more than that, to create a holy and just community, to come together and decide politically questions on policies of the community, at least according to Walzer, doesn't exist based on the covenant with God. Let's spend a little bit of time discussing whether he was right, whether he's right. Because I think, although maybe not directly covenantally, that actually halacha, Torah shebichtav, and Torah shebal peh actually does require that we do something and that we engage. And we begin our discussion in that regard with a very, really fascinating and pretty well-known text from the book of Yirmiyahu in source number 5. Yirmiyahu is, if anyone who's familiar with Yirmiyahu, we know, the Gemara calls Sefer Yirmiyahu Sefer Chorbana, right? The book of destruction. The reason why it's called the book of destruction is because it's really all about destruction. Yirmiyahu spends his life warning the Jewish people of impending doom, of the coming destruction of the temple, the razing of Jerusalem, the exile of the masses. He warns them of all these things. They don't listen. And in the course of that conversation with them, Yirmiyahu says the following: Ko amar Hashem tzvakot elokei Yisrael l'chol hagolah asher higleiti miyushalayim bavela. So says Hashem. Feel free to follow along in the English or in the Hebrew. So says Hashem, the God of Israel, to l'chol hagolah, to all of the exile, the diaspora, asher higleiti miyushalayim bavela, that I have exiled from Jerusalem to Bavel. Right? God is now, through the mouth of the prophet, prescribing particular behavior for those who are living in the diaspora. Binu batim v'shevu. Build homes and live in them. V'nit'u ganot v'ichlu et kiryan. Plant gardens and eat from the fruit of those gardens. Kichu nashim. Marry. V'holidu banim uvanot. Have children. Kichu livnechem nashim. Ve'epinotechem tnu la'anashim. V'teiladna banim uvanot. Revu sham ve'al timatu. Have children. Marry off your children. Don't be afraid to marry off your children. And they should build homes of their own. Ve'al timatu. What does that mean? Al timatu?
And don't diminish.
Don't diminish in any way your family planning, okay, because you're living in exile. Do what you would have done. Build a home, build a life, build a house, plant a garden, have a family. Okay?
Tantamount to creating a community.
And then, in case you were wondering what that actually meant, the Navi takes it a step further. And then what does it say in Pasuk Zayin? V'dirshu et shlom ha'ir asher higleiti etchem shama. Okay? V'itpalalu ba'ada el Hashem ki b'shloma yiyeh lachem shalom. Dirshu et shlom ha'ir v'itpalalu ba'ada. Okay? What does Dirshu et shlom ha'ir mean? Seek the welfare of the city in which I have exiled you to which I have exiled you. Seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you. V'hitpalalu ba'ada el Hashem. And do what? Daven on its behalf to Hashem.
Shabbos and shul.
Every Shabbos and Shul, what do? We say the prayer for the government. And we're going to get to this in just a second, but I always, during the last election season, I heard lots of people from both sides of the political spectrum saying things like, if Hillary wins the election, we're not davening for the government anymore. And people saying, if Trump wins the election, we're not saying the prayer for the government anymore. It has nothing to do, as we're going to see from actual sources in just a moment, has nothing to do with who the head of the government is. Why? Because the Pasuk tells us, what is the reason why we daven for the government? It has nothing to do with whether we like the president. The Pasuk ends, Ki bishloma yiyeh lachem shalom. if you want peace, if you want to live peacefully, what must you do? Make sure that the government lives in peace, that the government is stable, that the government is functioning. If it doesn't function, things won't be good for you. History has proven, tragically, history has proven that at least for the Jewish people, but really for everyone, bad governments are better than no governments. That almost always has been the case.
Could argue just the opposite, that when the person who got elected was not the person that I wanted, dafka, then I really have to pray for the government.
Enochinami, right?
Yes.
Right? And those arguments were made as well. When people who aren't who you approve of are running the government, they need your prayers even more, right? The sick person is the person who needs your prayers, not the healthy person, right?
That's not an optimistic point.
Maybe we're not davening hard enough. That's the problem. But again, I think, and we'll see in just a second. That right. So that's really what the Navi says. The Navi says, and actually it really works. I find it quite beautiful because what the Navi does is the Navi says, build from the inside out. Go, okay, take care of your own. Marry, build a house, plant a garden, have children. Your children should have children. And then, dear Shua Shlomeir, it's kind of like concentric circles, right? Don't think that just because you're going to exile, that you're allowed to cloister yourself in your own Daled Amos, okay? And only worry about yourself. You have to worry about yourself, and you shouldn't diminish in any way the planning or the development, the growth, the cultivation of your family that you otherwise would do. But your responsibility extends beyond that. Dirshu et shlom ha'ir, ki b'shloma yeh lachem shalom. You have a responsibility to ensure your own welfare and the welfare of your own community. And the only way to do that is to daven for the welfare of the government. Now, just as important as what the psukim do say is what the psukim don't say. It doesn't say, okay, find the causes which you believe in, which are important to you, and lobby the government on their behalf, okay? It doesn't say that. It doesn't say, it says, ensure the welfare of the government.
Doesn't particularize.
It doesn't particularize.
That's right.
It actually, now that doesn't mean, we should be very specific. That doesn't mean that we don't have license or a right or maybe even an obligation to lobby the government for things that we need. To petition the government for things that we need. But as far as the biblical mandate, as far as what the Navi Yirmiyahu is teaching us, the Navi doesn't say petition the government for the things that you need, right? Redressing your grievances, okay? It doesn't say that. It says make sure the government, make sure of the welfare of the government. That's what the Torah wants. That's what the Navi wants. Yeah.
Well, it's, I mean, the translation you have here says seek. To seek it means to have a decision, to make a decision about what is good for the government or what is the welfare of the government. You kind of seek it. I can't seek in a vacuum. I have to seek something that I believe makes for the welfare of the government.
Right, but true, absolutely. But if I'm talking about the same thing can be said in the exact opposite. If I'm seeking the welfare of the government cannot be simply defined by what I think is well, right? Because any government that exists, let's say in the United States of America in 2018, that only looks out for the welfare, let's say, of modern Orthodox Jews who live in Riverdale, right? They won't be very successful. So almost by definition, what it means to live in a community, okay, and is actually to give a little sometimes. The welfare of the government sometimes actually means not getting everything that you want. And I would actually suggest that that's precisely what Yirmiyahu is teaching. And you're 100% right. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Ellen.
Ellen is 100% right about this point. The verb that Yirmiyahu uses is to be doresh. Dirshu, what does doresh mean? Doresh doesn't mean to want.
Investigate.
Right. Correct. In a judicial context,
Right.
it means to actually
Particularize.
I'm trying to think to probe, right? To probe. It actually means to actively seek, right? Justice. A moral and just community is very elusive, very elusive. Tzedek tirdof, the Torah says. Justice you should pursue. The idea that the verb rodef is used in that context is very suggestive. You can't be complacent with an unjust society just because it continues to elude you, right? Dirshu et shlom ha'ir. Pursue it, right? Seek it, want it, go after it, even though it continues to elude you. So even from just reading Yirmiyahu, it sounds like that the Jews going into Bavel have a responsibility. Ki b'shloma yeh lachem shalom. You want to live in peace? You want to live in tranquility, in serenity, in harmony? You want to be left alone? Make sure that the government works.
So Jews in Nazi Germany,
Yeah.
right, before they were transported, should they have been praying for the welfare of the government, of the Third Reich?
So obviously, the Holocaust and Nazi Germany, throws a wrench into a lot of this stuff. In fact, some of the commentary here on Yirmiyahu actually deals with that because they were going to Bavel into not exactly totally friendly territory. Nebuchadnezzar did not, he did not like Jews. It wasn't like that. But if you read the prayer that we say for the government, we actually say that Melech Malchei Hamlachim, right? The supreme King of Kings should sustain the government and ask them to deal kindly with us, right? V'chol Yisrael Achenu. So part of the prayer isn't just that the government should be stable, but also that they should deal kindly with us. So what they should have done, it's hard to know. I shudder to think that the reason why Nazi Germany was as successful as it was because the Jews were praying for the government. Right. No, I know. I'm just saying it's hard to wrap your head around that particular period in history and draw any conclusions. Is I guess what I'm trying to say.
But I think the conclusion that I'm feeling
Yeah.
is that then you do have to make a decision individually, and maybe as a Jewish community, but certainly individually, as to what you think the welfare of the government that I'm seeking is. I can't just pray in a vacuum.
You have to do something, right?
And pray for something. I mean, it has to be a just society.
Right.
I can't just pray for any old society
Which
that
I
happens
think,
to exist.
which I think, Ellen, is precisely why the prayer that we recite for the government is incredibly vague. We don't refer to any policy decisions, right? It's not about that. Because a particular U.S. administration has a particular policy regarding a particular issue, it stands to the question remains whether that should be. Now, obviously, when you're dealing with like downright persecution and murder and genocide, so maybe that's having gone a little too far. But we daven for the government in the abstract. But I think you're right. Yes.
My gut feeling is that that's in a democratic way. My husband actually introduced the prayer for the United States government to Lincoln Square Civil War.
Okay.
Years it was not stated or recited. We have an obligation to learn from history. We have to see and sense what's going wrong early on and respond. all the prayers in the world as an individual, Hashem might listen to. But unless we as a community, Jews and Christians, Muslims, react to what we see historically happening, it will happen again.
So that, absolutely. And we should note that the order of things in the Psukim, and we're going to get to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot in just a second, it's very telling that the Mishnah, that the Pasuk says, Dirshu, and then says, Hitpalalu, right? What comes first in the Pasuk actually is advocate, act, do something, seek the welfare, which goes to what you're saying. All the prayers in the world, don't matter. The prayers come in the context of action, not action in the context of prayer, right? You need to be an active, engaged, involved, informed member of society. That is precisely what Yirmiyahu is asking us to do. He's asking us to be involved, engaged, and informed. Because if you don't ensure the welfare of the government, your own welfare will be in peril. And that's precisely that point, and that exactly. Okay?
What
Now,
an interesting thing that is.
Yes.
Because it means, in the end, that is a selfish assertion. You do it because it takes care of you, not because there's an inherent good in seeking everyone's welfare.
So okay, so which is why I think we need the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, because the rationale, the justification for seeking the welfare of the government that is given by Yirmiyahu is phrased slightly differently in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. And I would suggest that this value, this ethic of Jewish contribution to society evolved and developed from the time of Yirmiyahu to the time of Pirkei Avos in a way that actually made it slightly different. So let's take a look at what the Mishnah says. This is a part of a group of teachings at the beginning of the third perek of Pirkei Avot. This is source number 7 on your page. If we don't finish with all of this week, we'll begin with it at the beginning of next week and then move on to other things, because I feel like this is important. In source number 7, the first Mishnah in the third perek of Pirkei Avot says, this Mishnah doesn't appear relevant in the slightest, but it sets an important context, so let's read it anyway. Akavya ben Mahalal el Omer, histakel b'shlosha dvarim v'i ataba lidei avera. Okay? The word histakel is a difficult word to translate. In modern Hebrew, histakel means what? To look at, to gaze upon, right? In rabbinic Hebrew, lots of people think it means to consider or to reflect upon. I actually like the translation of to gaze upon, to look at, but let's leave that for now, okay? Look at 3 things, consider 3 things, and you will not come to sin. What are the 3 things? Da me'ayin bata, know from where you come. Ula'ana tahalech, to where you are going. V'lifnei mi ata atid litain din v'cheshbon, and before whom you will ultimately give an accounting. Me'ayin bata, where do you come from? Mi tipa srucha, from a putrid drop. It refers to probably a drop of seed, right? We all come from a drop of seed. That's how we're fertilized. We come from nothing. Ula'ana taholech, where are you going? L'makom afar rima v'toleya, to a place of wormy, dusty, earthly demise, when we're buried. Okay? We come from nothing, we're going to nothing. V'lifnei mi'ata atilidein din v'cheshbon, and before whom will you give an ultimate accounting? Lifnei melech machem lachim hakadosh baruch hu, before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, before Hashem. The formulation of this Mishnah is actually, we're not doing a close reading of this Mishnah quite like we need to. That if maybe in a future year we'll study Pirkei Avot together and really sink our teeth into this Mishnah the way we need to. The formulation of it, that it presents the 3 questions first and then gets to the 3 answers, is really it's very fascinating. But what this Mishnah really is how do you ward off sin? Is by recognizing that we are, in the grand scheme of things, very little. We matter very little, each of us, in the grand scheme of things. We come from nothing, going to nothing. You have to ultimately give an accounting before God. The smaller you make you sit, this is a good general rule. I tell my students this all the time. Not that you should think nothing of yourself, but the smaller you make yourself, the more you are able to look at yourself as a part of something larger than just yourself, the greater possibility there is for you, A, living a meaningful life, but also being able to ward off mistakes that you may make. If there are people in your life or causes in your life that you are afraid of disappointing, you're more likely to do the right thing. One of my favorite midrashim, sorry, I'm getting off on a 30-second tangent. One of my favorite midrashim is the midrashic teaching, you might be familiar with, that when Yosef was in seclusion with the wife of Potiphar, what was it, according to the midrash, that caused him to not sin?
He saw an image of his father.
He saw an image of his father, right? He saw an image of his father. I think that, read at face value, that midrash appears a little creepy, but I actually think that midrash possesses a profound lesson. What that means is that in the moment of truth, what caused Yosef to not sin is his ability to say, I don't want to disappoint my father. Who do we have in our lives that we don't want to disappoint, that we want to make proud of us? The extent to which we can view ourselves as something larger than just ourselves, the smaller we make ourselves, the greater our ability. I think that's kind of what, right? It's not about you. It's not all about you. And if it's not about you, then we do a better job of doing the right thing, in my experience. Anyway, that's Mishnah 1. And we learn that Mishnah only so that we can look at it as a context for Mishnah 2, which is, yes?
Also, there's a question of our existence is temporary, so we better hustle. In other words, you're not around long enough, so you better not waste any time.
Interesting. So that absolutely, we don't live forever. You may as well do the right thing, which actually brings us very nicely to the teaching of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim, who teaches us. Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim Omer, Heve mitpalel bishloma shel malchut. You should pray for the shloma, the welfare. The translation I put down is the integrity. It's not really a great translation, but I got this translation from a particular website. I'm not going to cast aspersions on them by telling you which one. But I don't think it's a precise translation. Heve mitpalel bishloma shel malchut. Pray for the welfare of the government, of the kingdom. Okay? Why? She'il malei mora'ah. Okay? Ish et reyehu chayim bela'o. Ilmalei, if not for mora'ah, right? The word yir'ah means what? Fear, right? If not for fear of the government, ish et reyehu chayim bela'o. So what's your name, sir? Sorry?
Which one?
You. Charlie.
No.
Oh, no.
For a moment, consulting with my wife to see which
Oh,
one.
okay.
Which one I would give.
Okay.
The answer is Charlie.
Okay, so Charlie pointed out that the self-serving nature of Yirmiyahu.
Well, that's what this is too. This is self-serving as well.
What is it?
Well, yeah.
Ilmale
I
mora'ah.
want to protect myself. What this is about, I'm sorry.
No, say.
What this seems to be about for me is make sure that your next door neighbor who's not Jewish and who has it in for you is afraid of another authority so that he doesn't get you.
I think you're projecting.
No, but I am is being continuous.
Okay. So I read this text and I actually read something else.
You read something additional.
Yes. Of course, additional. That's what it means to evolve.
Yeah, and I read it the way you're about to.
Okay. Which is what?
No.
What is this text, in terms of the rationale, the justification for praying for the government, focuses not in the least bit on me. It focuses on the members of society, right? The reason why you should pray for the welfare of the government is so that everyone is safe. That's what it says, right? That's what it says. Now, yes, included in the everyone being safe happens to be me, right? And go ahead.
Well,
Fight back, Charlie.
I'll engage. I won't
Okay,
fight.
no.
I'm too old to
Okay.
fight. Okay, I'm not too old to
Okay.
fight, but
Yeah.
about this I am. Isn't the temporal context of this Mishnah an era in which we were, in fact, to go back to my previous moment, we were in fact beset by danger from our immediate neighbors?
Throughout Talmudic times, it is certainly fair to say, and to greater and lesser degrees, of course, but there were times where our neighbors were more friendly towards us. There were times where our neighbors were less friendly towards us. But generally speaking, the Talmudic, let's say the tone or the mentality of the Talmudic society, both in the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud, is one which is, for the most part, distrusting of our neighbors. And that is, of course, true. But I'm given no indication of the following things. A, that this is talking about praying just for a Jewish government, right? B, that this is praying just for my own personal welfare. Despite Charlie's insistence.
I think insistence is a bit.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Come on.
Despite his stubbornness, no, I'm just kidding. I think if I wanted to read, I think you're 100% right. If I wanted to read this text, like with the overlay of Yirmiyahu, right, then that's maybe how I would read it. But if I want to read this text as, I don't want to say subversive, but as maybe taking the next step of what it means to be a citizen and pray for the welfare of the government, then it's actually saying something else. And yeah.
I think it goes also to what you were saying before. If Joseph weren't afraid to disappoint his father, he might have sinned. If we were not afraid, we might be the man who devoured our neighbor. I mean, it's everybody needs to be, to a certain extent,
Excellent.
afraid of.
So I want to make two more points, and our time is running short, so we'll continue with this and some of the commentary on this Mishnah, God willing, next week. I hope you all come back. I hope this was enjoyable and interesting enough to have you back next week. But be that as it may, there's actually a non sequitur in this Mishnah that we almost glossed over. Read it more carefully. Tell me what I'm talking about. Yeah, Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim.
Skana Kohanim is a bit of a nonsense.
Well, that's who he was. Okay. Yeah. No. What?
I have a little side comment.
Okay. Good. Say.
I'm simply
Yeah.
wondering. This is a complete
Please.
academic question.
Please.
I'm wondering whether the fact that it points out that he's Skana Kohanim indicates that, in the context of this submission,
Okay.
there's a sort of Prushit Stuki conflict, and he's, as a Skana
As a member of the aristocracy.
as a member of the aristocracy, and and again, this is a more of a historical
Absolutely.
question.
Yeah. So that's a very astute point. Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim may have been one of the people that he's asking everyone to daven for, right? 100%, right? So it sounds like he was in a position of authority, right? So that's also an astute point. Not where I was headed, but there are actually two clauses here which don't seem to necessarily relate to each other. Hitpalel b'shloma shel malchut, daven for the welfare of the government, right? The more precise formulation should have been, because if not for the welfare of the government, right, everyone will swallow each other up. But it doesn't say if not for the welfare of the government. It says if not for the fear of the government. And if what I care about is the fear of the government, what should it have said at the beginning? Pray for
The power.
that people fear the government, right? So it's actually, well, you're shaking your head.
No, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking sometimes, aren't there often times when they use two different words, to kind of mean to underscore different things, but they're basically pointing to the same thing?
That is precisely what the Mishnah does, and the Mishnah is doing precisely that here. I'm just to a certain extent pointing out the obvious, which is what the Mishnah seeks to do here is actually conflate two important issues, okay? The power of the government, the reach of the government, the authority of the government, the respect and the admiration that the government commands from its citizens is directly in correlation to the stability of the government. A government that is not bishalom cannot command respect. A government that is not stable, that is not healthy, can't.
It's not strong.
Strong,
But
yeah.
it could be
So,
strong negatively.
Right.
No.
so
But it has to be functional.
has to be functional, right? Right. Dysfunction. So dysfunction foments disrespect and anarchy. Well, that's fear of the opposite. In other words, in order for the government to command respect and have us do its bidding, it needs to be a government that, in 2018 we would say represents us, but has to be functional, has to be stable. That's so. Again, we can quibble about whether, not for a discussion around this table, at least not in front of the cameras, about whether the government as it functions as it is today is functional or dysfunctional. That's certainly a conversation worth having. But the truism it's still a truism, which is a functional government commands respect, and that the Mishnah is teaching us that by saying, pray for the welfare of the government, for if not for fear of the government, everyone will swallow each other up. One last point before we call it an afternoon and return, God willing, next week to continue our study. And that is the context, both the Mishnah before and the Mishnah after. Because the teaching that immediately follows this is a teaching by Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion. And Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion teaches a similarly, totally unrelated teaching. Now, the extent to which we can compare and synthesize the Mishnayot of Pirkei Avot and say it's actually trying to tell a story is debatable. It's not necessarily the case that one Mishnah has to do with the next, but the Mishnah says, two people who sit together, ve'ein beinehem divrei Torah, harei zeh moshav leitzim. It's a gathering of scorners, leitzim. Yeah, you ever heard the term? You're a leitz, right? So So two people who are sitting together, ve'ein beinehem divrei, it doesn't say they're learning. Ein beinehem divrei Torah. What does that mean? There isn't Torah between them. These Mishnayot, ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest are actually a series of Mishnayot which enjoin us to promote the general welfare. The welfare of ourselves, warding off sin, the welfare of the community around us, society, the government, and the welfare of my friend, right? Ideas, substance, content, productivity, growth, development, Torah. That's what we mean when we say Torah, right? A productive society. And the Mishnah, therefore, is actually trying to teach us the responsibility and the obligation we have to actually promote these things for the people who we live with and around. More on this, God willing, next week, as well as more about how the Jewish ethic of citizenship perhaps plays itself out. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Have a great
Brings me
day.
back to vote.
Yeah.